If people don't know anything about gambling, they have to listen to it. If people don't care about sports betting, they have to listen to it. And if people are in recovery from sports betting, that could be triggering or they have to turn the game off. So you can't just enjoy sports for sports' sake right now. The hate, the threats, the harassment of student athletes. Some of these sports bettors are also their classmates, their peers that go to the same school, right? So we need to protect their physical health, but we also need to protect their mental and emotional health as well.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the One Day at a Time podcast. Today's guest is Mike Buzzelli from the Ohio Casino Control Commission. Today, we're going to be talking about sports betting, college sports betting, gambling in general. Mike, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, for those that don't know you yet, how about a little bit of an intro? Like, what do you do and why do you do it?
Yeah, I'm the director of problem gambling services for the Ohio Casino Control Commission. Within that role, the commission regulates our 4 brick and mortar casinos and multiple mobile sports betting apps and other brick and mortar sports books in the state. We also oversee skilled gaming, which are the types of games that you might see at like a Dave and Buster's or a bar, and also daily fantasy sports as well. My role within that then is to focus on problem gambling services. So a percentage of the tax revenue from all those various operations go to a problem gambling fund. So we work with prevention agencies, treatment agencies, we work with researchers. We have a whole number of initiatives, many that we'll probably get into, to support those impacted by problem gambling, but also help to prevent problem gambling to begin with, and then work with stakeholders. So our own operators, we have really good relationships with many of our operators that operate in the state, but also priority populations. So things like colleges and universities, those impacted with other addictions or mental health conditions, those interplay a lot as well. Formerly, I was with Problem Gambling Network of Ohio, which is Ohio's affiliate to the National Council on Problem Gambling. So just a long background within this space. And I do it because it's great to help people, but it is also a really interesting field and a really interesting time specifically for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of like national media coverage and just people talking about gambling in general, I mean, I maybe we're just focusing more on it, but I feel like the more
Mhm.
obvious answer is it's just becoming a more widely talked about issue. Speaking of issues, if you were to say off the top of your head, like, what do you think the 3 most pressing issues are right now in Ohio, at least when it comes to sports betting or gambling in general?
Number one or A would probably be just the landscape of sports betting marketing. Obviously, it's an onslaught. You can't escape it, and that is particularly frustrating for many folks with lived experience who are trying to minimize or stop gambling. And when you can't turn the TV on, the radio on. Certainly if you are in recovery from other substances, there are a number of strategies to stay away from that substance or the populations or the places you used to use with or at. With gambling, you really can't get away from it. So I think the onslaught of marketing is troubling. Also, just the lack of public health messaging then within that. So, I think if you look at, whether you drink alcohol or not, everybody knows don't drink and drive. Whether you're 10 years old or 30 years old or 50 years old, you've heard things like buckle up or click it or ticket. These are public health messages that make us act or try to make us act responsibly when we're consuming alcohol, when we're driving. I think it would be safe to say everybody, if not a very, very great big majority, know that smoking causes lung cancer. These are all things that we're brought up with that are ingrained in our consciousness from youth due to public health messaging, due to programming and education within schools and families. We don't have that for gambling. There is no broad slogan like click it or ticket. There's no broad practice of, don't drink and drive for gambling. Yes, we have some of these RG, make monetary limits, make time limits, but that's still far behind in terms of impact and success of some of those other slogans campaigns have had. So I really think we need to work as a field to get to that point. Normalization as well. And I guess maybe this goes a little bit to being able to escape from the marketing, but I think marketing, say on a basketball court or on a football field is one thing, in-game advertisements, in-game commercials, but really what frustrates me the most is the in-game commentary on gambling. If people don't know anything about gambling, they have to listen to it. If people don't care about sports betting, they have to listen to it. And if people are in recovery from sports betting, that could be triggering or they have to turn the game off. So you can't just enjoy sports for sports sake right now, and that's really frustrating to me.
Absolutely. So we're looking at the marketing, we're looking at the lack of a public health issue focus, and we're looking at the mass normalization of gambling. I mean, as someone in recovery myself, I can relate to quite literally all three of those things. But honing in on the marketing messaging itself, this I think the slogan is like gamble responsibly. I think we see that all the time, but
Hmm.
I mean, Mike, I don't know what that means. I obviously I'm the case where it probably wouldn't have mattered if I did know what it meant,
Hmm.
but you know, I've seen some definitions out there of like, don't bet more than 1% of your net income. Well, we look at the net income average across America, we might be looking at 1% of that being $25. Like that's a table minimum at most casinos for one bet. Do you see that kind of mismatch becoming a problem?
Oh yeah. I mean, and another thing is we know that when you're in action, when you're in the throes of gambling, you're going to lose track of how much you're losing. So you're kind of setting people up to fail by saying keep track. It's hard to do that. And again, I don't always like to or want to make correlations to alcohol, but in moderation, count how many drinks you're drinking. Well, once you have a couple, you're not counting, you're forgetting to count or you can't count. So that strategy is setting people up to fail, and it's really not productive either. And I was just having a conversation about this earlier today about some messaging around one of our statewide campaigns. Now, you were talking about setting monetary limits. RG also talks about time limits. Are you gambling more than other people? Are you gambling more than your friends who also gamble? How much time are you spending gambling? Well, that definition or that time span or window, that's out the door now. Because if you were spending a lot of time sports betting 5 years ago, if you were spending a lot of time sports betting 10 years ago, you would have stood out. You would have been an outlier. People would have said, what are you doing? Or who's this person you're always calling on your phone? Now, a lot of people are sports betting and a lot of people are sports betting all the time. So, how do you recognize this person's, quote, spending more time than others doing it when the breadth of time we are all sports betting has grown so substantially? So, I think it's hard to kind of pick out someone who is doing it too much.
On the problem gambling side of that, something that I often say is not to use dollar amounts as the comparison point, because what is like a lot of money to one person might not be a lot to another. So when we as problem gamblers are thinking like, I need justification to keep going. Well, I'm not as bad as that guy.
Yeah.
Well, now we're seeing that shrink to even friend groups where you're like, well, I'm not gambling as long as the other guy in my frat, so my gambling must not be that bad.
Yeah.
And I think it opens up a world of problems.
Absolutely, absolutely. And really, we need to be taking money and time out of it and really focusing on the consequences. And so you look at, not just college students, but let's look at the broader majority of people who are gambling. And like, if you are having consequences to your reputation, if your boss can't trust you anymore, if your spouse can't trust you anymore, if, you didn't make it to your kid's soccer game or choir concert because you were gambling, it doesn't matter how much you're losing or winning or how much, if it's a half hour or 3 hours, if it's impacting your daily life and your relationships, then it's a problem.
Would you say that we're seeing a shift from more recreational gambling among that population, well, among the general population, to a riskier form of gambling? Like, why is it now that we're seeing more problems happening?
Yeah, availability, accessibility, and acceptability. So it's more available, right? More states are operating more forms of gambling. So there's something for everyone, right? There's multiple types of lottery products, whether it's scratch offs, Powerballs, Mega Millions, all these types of things. There's casinos in almost every state, and there's multiple casinos in almost every state. So you don't have to, it's no longer a destination activity. But then, of course, sports betting. So the availability of it is there. The accessibility of it is there because there's more brick and mortar or physical locations to go to. But of course, it's right at our fingertips 24/7, 365. But then the acceptability. So back to normalization. Anytime you increase one of those, you're going to see more people involved and thus more problems. But very quickly, we increased all three of them. There's been a huge increase in availability, accessibility, and acceptability over the past couple years that then creates that normalization. More people are becoming involved. Men, women, older, younger, anybody across the board. So then you're going to see more problems.
I understand it's impacting everyone across the board. I'd say there's been a bit of a hyperfixation, and rightfully so, on young men, particularly college aged, maybe high school aged, even sports bettors. Are social casino apps like Fliff or any particular like type of thing like that increasing the acceptability of gambling among that population?
Yeah, yeah. So if it's a social casino where you are only using, some sort of online currency, token, bonus play, anything that may not be real currency, the behavior is still there. Did candy cigarettes create a youth epidemic of cigarette smokers? Probably not. But I remember being young and pretending to hold a cigarette with a candy cigarette. So there is a nuance there. There is somewhat of a comparison there. So if you are gambling, even if it's mock gambling, you're getting the behavior, you're getting the excitement, you're seeing what it's like to possibly win money. So there's absolutely a grooming aspect there. But then we also know a lot of these types of sites are you can put real currency in and trade them out and make all these types of moves to eventually get real currency. So that's problematic because if gambling's actually occurring and there's not consumer protections, so youth are doing it, they're not of age, there's not things where you can set limits, there's not messaging around helplines or receiving treatment or things like that. That is all concerning, and you're seeing that now with these other event contracts. So these other things like Kalshi and these other operators who are essentially operating sports betting but calling it something different. Taking legality aside, if someone's sports betting or betting money on quote a future contract, but there's no age restrictions, there's no responsible gambling messaging, there's no support, there's no tax coming out to go to prevention and treatment services, that's all problematic. But and one more thing real quick, I think any risk behavior, the earlier onset, the greater chance of problem, but also the greater severity of problem. So if you start gambling at 17, 15, 13, 9, the younger you start, the more likely it is that you'll have consequences, and also the greater severity of those consequences may be.
I think I really like the candy cigarette metaphor. And I think a way of kind of extrapolating on that to add to it is like if you could hollow out the candy cigarette and actually put tobacco in it, that's kind of what a lot of these platforms are. I did an interview recently with a guy who actually started out with Fliff and he used like the free dollars and he ran it up to a couple $100 and ended up losing it and then put in his own money because he had become accustomed to betting at the higher amounts already. So he started putting and buying Fliff coins. I never did use that platform, but there's absolutely grooming there. And it's in a lot of states, I think you can be 18, right? To use that because it's like a sweepstakes or whatever.
Yeah, social casino sweepstakes, that's the exact verbiage they use. Let's also think more traditional activities. I mean, you see like Scooby-Doo lottery tickets, and a state lottery may say, well, we don't advertise to youth. Well, what adult is watching Scooby-Doo? Unless they're watching it with their kid, right? I mean, so like you still see some blurred lines there with traditional forms of gambling as well.
That's always been my take on it. I'm glad that you said it because I didn't know if we were going to dive into like that exact category. But what I've seen is like essentially these gray market illegal type operators like the fliffs, like the poly markets. They have a form of marketing that's very direct. I think we see a lot of the same things from traditional operators, but it's just that we're kind of treating it a different way. So as you just mentioned with the Scooby-Doo thing, it's like someone called it, if you see a turd sandwich, you got to call it a turd sandwich.
Yeah, well, and you know what? And sports betting is a hot topic, and I mean, it should be, but we always can't forget about other practices that are going on, making sure brick and mortar casinos are following compliance and regulations and IDing people at the door. We got to make sure we're doing all this pretty basic 101 stuff. And I remember it was like 2016, 2017, you started seeing these new things called daily fantasy sports. FanDuel, what is that? Have you heard about that? You can kind of do this and that, and make your people in the problem gambling world thought the sky was falling, right? And I remember every session at a national conference that year was everything was daily fantasy sports. And it's like there are trends. Now, I'm not saying traditional sports betting is going away, but like we got to make sure that we're covering the breadth of everything as well, not just focusing on what this brand new thing is. We have to be responsive to it and also try to be proactive, but we can't just focus there.
My into gambling was daily fantasy sports when I was 18, so that one definitely hits home. And it's just that it's all happening at once now. I mean, when I was finishing up my gambling back in 2022, I would be at a poker table. I'd be spinning a slot on my phone with a sports bet on that I was watching on the TV behind. I was like three, four things at once. I think that's probably the modern experience of gambling. Is that why college students maybe are particularly vulnerable? It's that with the free time, the disposable income, maybe they're falling into that category.
I think it's all of that. More free time, disposable, maybe some disposable income, a sense of independence, right? You're not under your parents' roof anymore, so you're engaging in other risk behaviors. It seems adult to gamble because if you're going to college, traditionally you're 18 and you can't go to a casino and play poker till you're 21. So maybe you get a sense of being 21 and being an adult. What else can't you do till you're 21, right? That is probably going hand in hand with the poker games. General risk behaviors there, but life situations are changing. You're thinking about things differently. You're doing things differently. There's some social pressure maybe. So it's a lot of people would just say it's a perfect storm. It's a perfect storm landing on a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year olds. And then that's being increased now because colleges are supporting sports betting, right? They're not immune to it. They're marketing it in their games and things like that. So we're trying to work more closely with them on not to be anti-gambling because we know that won't occur, and that's not necessarily even our role, but to make sure that there's services for those impacted, that there is prevention and public health messaging for those that are going to do it.
Let's talk about the marketing to the college age students. Are we seeing? I guess there's two parts of that I want to focus on. The first is what are you seeing on college campuses that is being like that is the direct marketing of the gambling, and then also like what are other avenues of marketing that you think will be particularly important to focus on for college age students?
Well, in Ohio, they're not allowed to. And when we first started sports betting, there were a few that did, and there was one operator that was pretty egregious with it and even set up like a college game day type stage on the college campus before a big football game. So, quite frankly, we find the hell out of them. And we're not typically punitive. We don't want to do that. We want to work with our operators to do better, to prioritize responsible gambling, and many of them do a good job. But we also had to set that early stage. You're not going to come in here and not follow our rules and regulations. So there should be no direct to consumer marketing happening on college campuses in Ohio. Yeah, well, I think again, then maybe it's within the games. So maybe you're not seeing advertising on the Ohio State campus, but you are if you're seeing an Ohio State football game on TV. So you're still seeing that, right? And there were colleges and universities that were forming formal relationships with some operators. That was and still is really problematic. But then what you're really seeing, our big concern is the harassment of student athletes. So that was another thing we acted on very quickly. Within the first 6 months of operating sports betting in Ohio, we banned individual prop bets. So yes, you can bet Ohio State is going to beat Michigan, but you cannot bet individual propositional bets on the players. So you can't bet how many yards the OSU quarterback will throw for, how many yards the Michigan running back will run for. That makes it too personal, and it creates some of that animosity if that player doesn't perform well. And social media is there, and we see it, we collect it, the hate, the threats, the harassment of student athletes, not just by sports bettors, But some of these sports bettors are also their classmates, their peers that go to the same school, right? So we need to protect their physical health, but we also need to protect their mental and emotional health as well. So we do not allow individual collegiate prop bets in this state, but also we're running a big campaign called More Than a Bet, humanizing student athletes.
My name is Desiree, and I'm a first-generation college student.
I'm Zach. I'm undecided in my major, and I'm a catcher.
This message was sent to you.
$500 down the toilet along with your performance. You are worthless.
Get the hell off the field before you lose me any more money, you sorry
This is wrong.
I'm more than a bet.
Stop harassing college athletes over a bet. Learn more at morethanabet.org.
We were getting reports from a number of different colleges, and so we have a monitoring system set up. So we can receive these threats and then follow up on them. Not only is that to safeguard the students and the universities, but we're also working with the sports betting operators in the state. So, for instance, if somebody is sending violent threats to another student, that student can screenshot them or send them to us via a mobile health app that we have. It's called the Ohio Student Wellness app. We will investigate it. We'll try to find out who the person is based on, their handle and all the other information we can sort out. And if we can match that individual, that handle, that account to a sports betting account with a particular operator, we've talked with those operators about shutting those accounts down.
Let's talk about the role of influencers in the marketing space and kind of the ideologies that these college-age students are now internalizing as a result of what they're seeing online. Along those lines of the influencers, what are you seeing those ideologies being for young people with gambling?
Well, I think looking at it holistically, mental health and wellness, why I believe so much in the More Than a Bet campaign is because it's not anti-gambling, and it's not even responsible gambling. What it essentially is anti-bullying, right? And a lot of people can get behind that, no matter what your thoughts are on gambling or on sports betting. If you're a sports betting fanatic, pretty much everybody is anti-bullying, right? So that's why I think it'll be really successful. We are just in the first year. We are still just piloting it. But where we really want to take that is to not just a marketing campaign or a public service announcement, but more so a social norming programming and bringing education and programming around the More Than a Bet message onto college campuses, partnering with the athletics department, partnering with Greek life, fraternities, sororities are very influential on their campus. What's more impactful, an advertisement on the jumbotron for More Than a Bet, or 80 fraternity brothers taking up 5 whole rows of the Ohio State horseshoe, all wearing a More Than a Bet t-shirt, right? We want to make it more of a social norming thing of, I don't know what the slogan would be yet, but Buckeyes support Buckeyes or something like that. And I'm using Ohio State a lot. Let's go to BGSU, Bowling Green State University here in Ohio. Falcons support Falcons, right? Making it normalized to not do this to our fellow students, right? And that's where I think social influencers can come into play. So if you and me are sitting down and I say, oh my God, that guy cost me, and I'm cursing his name and cussing him out and saying I'm going to tell him off. I think the friend group can be that voice of reason. Even something as simple as, hey, Mike, he's probably more upset that he missed that shot than you are, right? Let's remember they are people too. They're doing this for passion and for glory, not to be your gladiator or whatnot. They're not here just for your entertainment.
That strategy directly combats kind of the natural flow of social media. When a major event happens, like an Ohio State game or a Bowling Green State game, when the event happens, when the dropped pass happens, when the deflection happens, it becomes a highlight, and that highlight gets circled out on social media. Then it gets reacted to, and big influencers who had a bet on the game could react to it, sports betting influencers. And so this kind of grassroots movement of working with fraternities or making it a social movement does battle that, because we see this big burst of negativity and then it's silent, but the athlete is the one that's internalizing it and keeping it for the following days. We've been talking a lot about college-age students, but what about the students who are younger? What about the kids who are in middle and high school? Is there particularly a trend right now of those people getting involved with gambling?
Yeah, we see that, and whether it starts with maybe video games and loot boxes and things like that, and you've seen a number of jurisdictions put much stronger regulations on loot boxes, whether they have to be free or they have to show the odds of getting a certain item, things like that. So it's really interesting. That is in an effort to make it more responsible and protective. But by showing the odds, it also kind of makes it even more gambling, right? Like, the odds of like spinning a slot machine or something like that. But yeah, so they're normalized. It's being normalized with video games, loot boxes, fliff, all these types of things. But also then what they're seeing, right? An eighth grader may have an older brother, older sister, older cousin, uncle, parents who are then engaging in all of what we're talking about. They're doing it with them. We know that, dads are setting up accounts and letting their younger children make bets on them and things like that. Like they are participating, and you're seeing that just with normalization of March Madness brackets, Super Bowl squares, and pools. So it doesn't have to be online. It doesn't have to be legal or illegal. It's just becoming more social now. So they're seeing it so much. The other thing, really interesting, we always kind of say we look overseas. Europe, especially England, has had sports betting for so long. We're going to look at what they do. We're going to try to not make the same mistakes, this and that. We didn't bring this up earlier, but when we were talking about marketing and sponsorships, the exact same day that English football put out an article about a rule change that by the end of the season, they had to get new sponsorships for their kits, that any soccer team that had a gambling sponsor on their jersey had to be removed by the next season. That same day, the Washington Capitals of the NHL became the first American professional sports team to get a gambling advertisement. But it shows that where other jurisdictions are saying this is getting a little out of control, we need to pull some of this back, we're saying go, go, go. And then so just to youth, they're watching those games, they're seeing that, and if it's on a jersey that then they're wearing or things like that, you can't get more normal than that.
And it all makes sense talking about it like this. It's like, this is very obviously something that needs attention. We need to figure out what's the best way of regulating this, talking about this. But practically, how do we have conversations with parents without sounding like narcs? A dad is watching a game with his son. The dad doesn't have a gambling problem. And he sees a gambling commercial come up, or they're filling out a bracket together. What do we tell that father to not make it sound like we are trying to scare him straight in his parenting strategy?
Yeah, and I think that's where then we can make some of those correlations in a more positive light to other things like drugs and alcohol. I think I know things about moderation, or not doing it all the time, things like that, what it means, this is an adult activity, or when you're a certain age, things like that. So I think it follows that same line. And again, we don't want to be narcs. We don't want to tell people not to gamble, but it is difficult, and I'm comfortable enough to say it's a hard strategy to give to them, and it's a hard conversation to have because everybody is different and the behaviors might be different. But I think it is just around recognizing that this is an adult activity. We're doing it together and we're just having fun with it. We're not putting money on the line or things like that. If it's, let's say, like a social March Madness bracket. I think maybe just having the conversation, no matter how small or unimpactful the conversation is, the fact that the conversation occurred, that this is an adult activity, or, I'm not spending very much here, just plants that seed when other further conversations may need to occur. Or they see somebody, they see a friend who's going overboard. It just, if the behaviors become normalized, the little bit more we talk about it, then that conversation becomes normalized as well.
I think that's fair. Thinking back on my own childhood, I'd have small little poker games with my family, but I wasn't allowed to have a sip of wine. So there was a very strong distinction there between the two things. And I think as more people take gambling addiction, problem gambling seriously, it might just become a natural conversation. It might just be something where inherently the kid knows, oh, my parents won't let me do this till I'm 18.
Yeah, and just like the other behaviors we talked about. And we are starting to see that from the top down. So there are big national campaigns, and the Ohio Lottery takes part in it. There's a big one with state lotteries called Gift Responsibly, and it's a campaign around not giving lottery tickets as graduation presents, stocking stuffings for Christmas, birthday presents, things like that, because lottery isn't youth play, it's for adults. There's a big national campaign around that, and then many states like Ohio pushes that even further. So if you're seeing it from the operators being able to have that conversation, don't give our product to youth for gifts, those types of conversations then can start to trickle down to the family as well.
And are those kinds of conversations basically what individual people should be having in order to protect themselves from problem gambling?
Yeah, well, I think the first is know what the warning signs are. So you can recognize them within yourself, hopefully, early on if you get to some of those consequences that come out. Setting limits and things like that, of course. But I really think it's more so two things. Understanding that even though it's a behavior, it is an addiction and it changes the brain chemistry. It's the same reward circuitry. It's the same addiction path within the brain as any other substance you put in your body. You can and do become physically addicted to the behavior. So it is just like you were allowed to gamble with your family, but you couldn't have wine. Well, those are actually the same thing. So it's first that understanding that this is something that can occur, but then the awareness around that resources are available, so you may be able to, you may be able to get ahead of it, I suppose, before it gets there. And then also alternatives. So gambling shouldn't be the only activity. Making sure that you're doing other things that give you inherent joy and passion, whether that's reading, exercising, gardening, anything that you do that you enjoy, making sure that those don't whittle away and get filled with gambling, because then gambling, one, not just obviously becomes the only activity, but it overtakes everything, and then you're only able to get the joy and the passion and the dopamine from that one activity. So making sure that you still have the alternative activities.
Having people understand that when you develop a gambling addiction, you are now dependent on gambling to basically feel is something that I think should be pretty alarming. But you had mentioned resources. Where can someone go if they want to learn more about where they can get help for themselves or a loved one?
Yeah, well, I know the people that watch this are from all over. So the National Council on Problem Gambling has great resources, and that's ncpgambling.org. And then certainly from there you can navigate to other states and those specific resources. Here in Ohio, three great ones are pausebeforeyouplay.org, which is a responsible gambling campaign that we have here. Basically, sports are fast, betting shouldn't be, pause before you play. It's got a ton of great information, self-quizzes. Timeoutohio.com has a lot of great resources that we utilize here in Ohio. Gamban, which is a blocking software. Gamfin, which is financial coaching. I would highlight those two because those are for anyone, anywhere as well. Gamban is a great resource. Gamfin is a tremendous resource, not just for the individual, but thinking about loved ones who may need some financial coaching strategies around budgeting, around, maybe they're in charge of the finances for the first time. It's a great resource. pgnohio.org, the Problem Gambling Network of Ohio, also has tremendous resources, not just for individuals and loved ones, but then for professionals. So if anybody else, other professionals are watching this, a lot of great resources there as well. So those are ones that jump to mind.
Yeah, and the resources that Mike mentioned are available in the description of this video. If you go over to my website, I have them all listed out under my resource tab. Say someone's watching this and they're possibly struggling right now in silence, or they're watching a loved one struggle in silence. What message would you leave them with?
I'm going to leave them with two messages because as you were speaking, I thought of two more, and knowing the platform we're on and things like that. eVive and Recover Me are two really good mobile health apps that both have various strategies, whether you want to regain control, diminish your gambling, completely stop. A lot of great resources on both of those. The one thing that people need to know is that you're not alone. There's other people going through this, and there's a tremendous support system out there. I think maybe the general community is still not completely aware that gambling can be an addiction. And as you said, you become dependent on it like any other substance. Just like other substances, there are a ton of resources and a ton of trained professionals and a great community of folks in recovery that have lived experience that want to help their peers. So whether it's Gamblers Anonymous, whether it's clinical therapy, it is out there and it's readily available and it's understanding and it's non-judgmental. So reach out because somebody will be there to help and willing to help and ready to help.
No matter what you're going through, remember that you're not alone. Hope that you enjoyed watching this podcast. And if you're looking for a story of someone in recovery from gambling addiction, then check out this video. Let's keep getting better together, one day at a time.